Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So I just wanted to do a little bit of a wrap up for January and just talk about why I didn't reach my goal for number of books in January. So for my Goodreads goal, I try to read 100 books every year. I've done that for the past few years, and in order to reach that goal, I need to read about 8 books per month. Last year in 2021, I read 5 or 6 books in a few of the months and I still made my goal. I just had to compensate other months and read shorter books, etc. So 100 books is a bit of a challenging goal, especially for someone who works full time. I know a lot of us in the BookTube and Bookstagram community have other jobs besides doing YouTube or Instagram or reading or anything adjacent to reading. So I know it's hard to read that many books. I'm honestly not sure how some people find the time to read like 200 books a year. That's insane to me, because 100 books is hard. But it's something that I really want to do for myself because I love reading and I want to force myself to get as much reading done as I possibly can. And it's something that I like to keep up because it feels like a good solid number for amount of books read for someone who makes content off of books. It seems wrong to put videos out when I don't have new books that I've read. And that's why January has been a bit of a challenge for me. I really didn't read that much comparatively to other months. I only read 5 books, which doesn't sound like a terrible number, but I feel bad about it because I felt like most of the month I wasn't actively reading and I didn't feel like I was fully engaged. And that's for a couple of reasons. First of all, I switched my jobs. So I was a children's librarian for 3 years and I ended up opting to take on a full-time position at my coffee shop that I work at. So I'm now a full-time barista, which is so amazing and so exciting, and I'm loving it so far. But it has been a transition to sort of get used to that schedule. So that happened in January, and in the beginning of January, I took a bit of a hiatus because I was sick. So I had to take some time off of work. I had to take some time off of doing anything basically because I couldn't even focus on reading while I was sick. So it was a hard start to the month. My boyfriend also got sick, so he was stranded here. He couldn't fly back home, and I didn't get to see him even though he was here. So it was just a weird time. And then, like I said, right after that, I made the jump into being a full-time barista. And there's just been a lot of upheaval and craziness in my personal life that eventually I will get into when I know more specifics on everything that's happening. But it's all leading towards good things, I will tell you that. It's not anything that's catastrophic or something that I can't handle, but it's just a lot to take on. And I just feel like I've been really busy and really overwhelmed. I don't know why I'm rambling, but I just wanted to give you a little update about what's happening in my life and why I haven't been the most present on Instagram especially, but YouTube and Instagram. So that's my little life update for you, but I wanted to get into the 5 books that I did read in January and talk about the 1 book that I'm planning to read in February. So the first book I read this month is probably a no-brainer. You probably know what it is. It is Heartstopper by Alice Oseman, Volume 4, because this came out January 4th, I believe, and I was super excited about it because I read Heartstopper 1 through 3 in late November. I think late November. So I haven't read anything off of the webcomic, so I was saving my reading time for when I had a physical copy of it. So I pre-ordered it, I got it in the mail, and I immediately read it. It was super cute, though I will say this one delves a lot more into the darker things that are going on in the boys' lives. Charlie is dealing with an eating disorder, and it kind of dives more into his struggles with his mental illness and all of the things that happen subsequently, and how mental illness and eating disorder specifically play into a relationship, how it's really hard to handle that as a partner to someone who has this disorder. It just delves into a lot of more deep, nuanced topics that I wasn't expecting to get from a very lighthearted, fun YA romance. So it was surprising in that way, but it still was very sweet, and it was more hard-hitting than some of the other books because it was more intense. So I gave this one 5 stars, and it was a really, really great wrap-up to the collection so far. I think there's 1 more or maybe 2 more coming out, but I won't be reading them until they come out. I'm not gonna read the webcomic just because I don't like reading online or on a phone or anything. I much prefer my paper copies, so I'll be waiting for that. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed it, and it was a great start to the month. So next up is a book that's kind of a funny story. I picked up this book. It's A Mouthful of Air by Amy Koppelman? I don't know. I had this on my shelf because I had picked it up in a bookstore. It sounded interesting, so I just picked it up, and I kind of forgot about it. And then my mom had mentioned a movie to me that she was interested in watching. And I was like, that sounds really familiar, that whole concept. And then I realized that it was a movie based on this book. So this book is about a mother who is dealing with some serious depression. She attempts suicide, and it's about the aftermath of that. And it is really, really awful. Like, I cried when I finished this book. It was just awful. Like, the ending was terrible. Not in that it was like badly written or something, but just what happened was awful. So it was really heart-wrenching. But my mom and I both ended up buddy reading this, and she was like, come on, read it, because she was reading it faster. So I had to kind of rush through and read this, and then we watched the movie. We hated the movie. Actually, the movie was awful. Did not like it at all. It changed so much of what happened in the book, and I just hated it. I didn't like it at all. So yeah, it was a little bit of a frustrating watching experience, but this one I gave 3 stars. I don't actually remember. I found that overall it was just sort of a meh read. Like, I had a very emotional response at the end, but it was just overall not something that really stuck with me or something that was memorable. As I was collecting the books that I read this month, I forgot about it until I went on my Goodreads. Like, it just didn't stick with me in the way that I had hoped it would. So not a huge fan of this one, unfortunately, though it was fun to buddy read something and then watch a movie with my mom. That whole experience is always fun. I love buddy reading, but it just wasn't as good as I had hoped it would be. So that is A Mouthful of Air. Moving right along, we have the last book that I read for an article that should be published pretty soon over on Books and Bao, but this is Apple and Knife by Intan Parameditha, and this is a Indonesian translated book. It's basically a collection of very short stories inspired by horror fiction, myths, and fairy tales, and it sort of subverts them and changes them, and it's very feminist and a very, very unique collection. Like, I've never read anything like this. So with short stories, there's kind of 2 different ways it can go. I always rate individual stories in the front like this, so you can see I have individual star ratings for each of the stories, and that helps a lot to kind of figure out the final number of what the star rating is going to be, because usually I average it. So either I will take all of those and average them, or I'll have really, really strong feelings about the book and I will just give it 5 stars, even though a lot of the stories weren't 5 stars. So in this instance, I ended up, I believe, averaging it because it wasn't like a 5-star favorite read, but it was really, really good. I really did enjoy it. There were just a few stories that I felt like were kind of duds. So I wanted to account for that. I know it's all very, very subjective and star ratings are kind of ridiculous, because how can a book, which, especially a short story collection, which has so many elements, like how can that all be boiled down into a 5-star scale? So it's all very subjective and ridiculous anyway, but I gave this one 4 stars, and I do highly recommend it if you're interested in fairy tale retellings or fairy tale inspired horror fiction, anything like that. Each story is really, really short and easily digestible, and I really, really liked this book. So this was one of the better books I read this month, and yeah. Second to last, I have The Authenticity Project by Claire Pooley. This was a book that I read for a book club, which I'm going to be going to on the 3rd of February. So this was for the Boozy Book Club, which is a book club that is run at my job. So my job has a coffee bar and a wine bar. I work at the coffee bar, but this was a wine bar book club that I was kind of helping to run and work on. So we read this one this month. So this one follows a notebook called The Authenticity Project, which is started by a man named Julian Jessup, and he basically has this idea that he's going to write an authentic truth in the notebook and then try to pass it along to another person and see how far it gets, with the idea that you can talk to strangers authentically and not be judged. So it is an interesting concept, but the execution I just wasn't a fan of. I just felt like everything was a little predictable until the end, but the characters had their problems resolved so easily and it felt unrealistic to me. It just wasn't something that super captured my interest, and it was just unfortunate that I was just disappointed in how it ended. So wasn't a huge fan of this. I think I gave it 3 stars or something like that, because the ending did help. Like the twist, it made me angry, which kind of was helpful because at least I had some emotion to work with instead of just being like totally flat, like no emotions, no thoughts, head empty, like nothing. And at least having a twist at the end that I hated everything about it, at least it gave me like something to talk about, something to go off of, something to think about. So I think I'm gonna rate this one 3 stars if I didn't already. Yeah. And then lastly, we have a book that I just finished today, and it is The Exhibition of Persephone Q by Jessie Jezeweska Stevens. So this is a book about a woman named Percy who is pregnant. She hasn't told anybody, not even her husband, and she's having some weird feelings and thoughts about her husband. She's not sure how she feels about him. Even though she's very unclear about that, you kind of get the feeling that she is going through like a marital crisis. So she receives a package in the mail, and inside the package is a book, which is all photographs from an exhibition that her ex-fiance put together. And she believes that the photographs are of herself, and she has no memory of consenting to that or being in the photographs even. She doesn't remember any of it. So it's just a really, really interesting look at her life and her past and a lot of things that are going on in her personal life, but it's also kind of commentary on how hard it is to control and track where your image is, especially in a digital age. This is taking place like post 9/11. Now we have computer technology and things are a lot more accessible. We can find images very, very easily online. But that also means that we don't have a lot of protections on our own images. We can't control who uses our image or what happens to it once it's out in the world. So it's a really, really interesting commentary, and it's really exquisitely written. I loved the writing of this book so much. It was so pretentious, but in a way that I could totally get behind because I love that. I didn't end up annotating this, but the next time I read it, which I inevitably will, I will definitely be annotating it because there's so many quotes that were so beautifully put together and things that were applicable to life and commentary on society at large. And I know that I'm gonna want to return to this. So I gave this one 5 stars, even though honestly, this took almost all month for me to read, even though it's very short. And that is because I kept putting this aside to try to finish projects that were more pressing. It wasn't because I didn't like this book or found it boring or anything of the sort. I loved this book. This was my favorite book that I read in January, but it's just hard to finish a book that you're reading just solely for pleasure when you have all of these projects that you need to get done. So that is the final book that I read in January. I love this book, highly recommend, it's amazing. All right, moving along to what I am going to try to read in February. So this isn't a typical TBR, I only have 1 book on this list. And that is because partway through January, my boyfriend challenged me to read The Priory of the Orange Tree. He asked me to read this because he just read it and he isn't a huge reader, so when he does read a book, he usually asks me to read it, which is why I got into the Wings of Fire series. He talked to me about the first one and I was like, okay, I need to read this so I understand what you're talking about so we can discuss it because like I said, he's not a big reader. So I wanted to participate in a book that he was enjoying. And we got into an amazing, amazing series together because of it. So I'm very grateful that he kind of asked me to read it. But this is a book that I had recommended to him, I think a while ago, and said sounded interesting, sounded like something that he might enjoy. He really likes fantasy, he loves dragons. It just seemed like a good book for him to read. And he basically read it and then said that I had to read it, which I kind of wanted to eventually, but I wasn't planning on doing it right this second. So like, if you can tell, I'm a little salty because it came at a really bad time. But what I decided to do was finish everything I needed to finish in January and just try to dedicate the entire month of February, or as long as it takes in February, to reading this massive 800-page book. As you know, I don't read long books, I have a big book fear, but in 2021, I conquered A Little Life, which is also like 800 pages. So maybe I'll be able to read this in less than a month. I'm just gonna cross my fingers and I'm gonna need moral support from you guys because this is hard for me. This is intimidating, this is scary, it's gonna hurt my wrists because it's giant, but I will read The Priory of the Orange Tree in February. I am putting it out there. I'm making myself accountable. I will read this for nothing else but to be able to have a nice book discussion with my boyfriend. So the other question that arises is how I'm going to deal with my Goodreads if I only read one book in February. Good question. I guess I'm gonna have to find some poetry books and some graphic novels and just speed through those, because there's no recovering. If I am 7 books behind in February, because I only read 1 book, and I'm 3 books behind in January, that is kind of a pickle. So we shall see how that goes. Wish me luck. I know that the Goodreads number is just arbitrary and that I could totally change it, but I am not one to go back on what I've already put out there in the world. I want to finish it. I want to read 100 books this year. So just wish me luck. I'm gonna do my best. So yeah, that is my February reading plans. I know today's video was a little bit different, a little bit more casual and candid, but I just wanted to share that with you because I just want to show more real life. I don't want to seem like I am always put together and that I read so many books a month and that my reading life is always perfect, because it's not. Sometimes you just don't feel like reading, and I think that happened for me a little bit in January. So I'm proud of myself for reading 5 books. I think that's pretty okay. So yeah, let me know what you read in January, what your favorite read in January was, what your least favorite read in January was, as well as what you're hoping to read in February. Let's talk about it. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.